Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks, bringing you the latest news from Taiwan. I'm Betty Chen.
I'm Huang. As the annual Han Kuang military drills are approaching in July, we'll look at the nation's military preparedness and how Taiwan's friends and allies play a role in deterring Chinese aggression.
Joining us are Arthur Ding, longtime military expert and professor emeritus at National Chengchi University. Alexander Huang, International Affairs Director and representative to the U.S. of the Kuomintang, Taiwan's largest opposition party, and Raymond Sung, Deputy CEO of the think tank Taiwan-U Constitution Foundation, an expert in Taiwan and the region's geopolitics. A warm welcome back to all of our guests today.
Taiwan Defense Minister Chiu Kuo-zheng mentioned that Taiwan-China ties have become much more severe in the past few years. Professor Ding, given the rising tensions and the upcoming Han Kuang exercises, what do you believe is the best strategy for Taiwan in deterring a Chinese invasion?
Well, as we all know that since 1995-96 Taiwan Strait crisis, China realized that in any kind of a future conflict in the Taiwan Strait, United States will definitely get involved in one way or another.
So you're saying they think
they believe that. So they start to conduct the so-called, I would say, across the board, the so-called military modernization programs. Now, in terms of the hardware system, we can see in the past 3 decades, now they develop and they deploy so many new platforms like warships, aircraft carriers, amphibious landing attack ships, and the new jet fighter, new bombers, the air refueling vehicles, so on and so forth, so many. So I would say, how should we defend ourselves and boost our own defense? I would say it would be a very tough job for us, and we have to do it across the board. For instance, how can we survive China's the first wave of attack? Because we all assume that if China wants to launch the invasion against Taiwan, then China might launch all kinds of systems they have to knock out Taiwan's the command control and the so-called platform systems. So the first thing we have to think about, how can we survive? Survivability probably is the most important issue we have to think about. And the second is about the command and control. If we are under China's all-out attack, then how can we survive our command control system so that our morale can remain high and we can the command from the above can defend China's potential invasion, so on and so forth. So I would say the survivability and the command control are the most important the issue we have to address. Then below these 2 issues, there are so many issues we need to address, but the most important is the survivability and the so-called command and control.
But without the premise that the U.S. will provide support, is what you're saying.
Yeah, because we don't know how U.S. will react, frankly speaking. So it probably will not be realistic to assume that the U.S. will send their soldiers to defend Taiwan side by side with us. I would say it's quite somewhat unrealistic. Yeah.
So Alex, a follow-up question. What is likely on Xi Jinping's mind given the large military exercises as well as the PLA's activity surrounding Taiwan?
As Professor Ding had just mentioned, the People's Liberation Army had prepared itself for a full scale of military operations against Taiwan for a long time. That's their constant objective. Xi Jinping started in November 2015 with his new defense and military reform. And he emphasized that all the military training and drills should have end at the actual combat. So the training and exercises in the past decade, since Xi Jinping launched his reform, the PLA operational capability has significantly increased, and especially in terms of their interoperability among services, which they called integrated joint operations. And also they wanted to develop their capability to resist or offset the possible foreign intervention in the Taiwan scenario. Those are the capability that Xi Jinping emphasized. So far, because China had not been in a war situation for 44 years, we had witnessed their drill, their training, but we don't know whether in actual military operations or any kind of conflict that how their troops would perform.
Mm-hmm. Raymond, given that there's increased capabilities on the Chinese side, what do you think would serve as the best deterrence for Taiwan?
Of course, there are several aspects to that. I think not only Taiwan, also Taiwan's closest allies, including the United States and Japan, also work very hard on the deterrence, effective deterrence of. It's like an effort to dissuade Xi Jinping from launching a full-scale attack on Taiwan, and those are efforts to prevent the war from actually happening. And all those actions takes several aspects. Militarily, it needs to find the loopholes and find the deficiencies and try to catch up as soon as possible on the several key aspects. For example, the U.S. found, according to CSIS War Games result, one crucial point is the lack of sufficient capabilities from a long-range attack on the ships launching an amphibious landing on Taiwan. And that's the clear examples that the U.S. need to catch up on that to provide sufficient deterrence. And also for Taiwan, whether it has resolve, the sufficient level of resolve among its people to defend itself, to defend its way of life and its democracies, and whether they are willing to put into more support into its militaries, and whether the military has works to modernize itself and to have sufficient manpower and personnel. And all those aspects of increasing on the one hand, Taiwan's own capabilities to defend itself, and also the allies' preparedness to get involved in the Taiwan contingencies. I think all fronts of those efforts are the current focal points of discussion now.
So a quick follow-up question to you, Raymond. Do you think that the determination of Taiwan, or you can say like democracy and freedom, can also serve as a way for deterrence?
Yes, may I say something about that? It's the prerequisite that Taiwanese people needs to demonstrate its willingness to defend itself and not to be coerced into submission. Mm-hmm. Those are, again, several backgrounds. Firstly, the severe, very large-scale political warfare has been waged by the propaganda machinery of the Chinese government, trying to, at one hand, coerce Taiwanese people to give up their efforts to increase their own capabilities, and secondly, trying to persuade Taiwanese people that there's alternative ways, for example, to engage into negotiation, peace negotiation. And those are disillusionary. These are disillusional because the Chinese government is never have a good record to keep its own words.
Professor Ting, going back to actual capabilities, do you feel that the U.S. speeding up its delivery of, say, HIMARS rocket systems will actually help in that deterrent?
It's a very tough job, and as I said earlier, we have to prepare across the board. So that the HIMARS, I would say, is only one part of the system we procure from the United States. We probably also, because our so-called military strategy says that we have to deny or intercept from the sea or in the air China's invasion. So in addition to HIMARS, we probably need to procure something else. For instance,
what do you say of like offensive weapons, like that could actually destroy, say, targets within China?
Well, sometimes weapon system is hard to say it's defensive or offensive, I would say. Sometimes it's divided by the range, but we, as I said, we need to prepare across the board so that in addition to HIMARS, we probably need to procure some like surface-to-ship missiles. Or surface-to-surface missile able to hit, the military target, in the China's southeast coast area. When they start to concentrate their force or their command control the center systems. So I would say, HIMARS is only one part of the system we procure. We probably also need to think about others tools or weapons so that we can to give Chinese military damage as much as possible, so that to think over what kind of cost they are able or not able to afford. So I would say HIMARS is only one part of that, and we have to think about lots of others weapon systems.
So talking about weapon systems, now Alex, you're a military expert. So we know that now, what kind of message is China trying to send by sailing a Shandong aircraft carrier to the east coast of Taiwan?
Well, in the old times, the western coast of Taiwan would be the front line. And given the modern technology, the available missiles, and the aircraft carrier. Of course, China now has the ability to deploy its aircraft carrier strike groups to the eastern side of Taiwan, which it would be either Western Pacific or the Philippine Sea. Of course, the main purpose are two. One is to deny access of American support. For instance, they will deploy the Shandong or their own carrier to the area that the United States Navy would like to deploy. That's one. The other is that with their developing capability, they probably over time would have the power to project force from the Western Pacific to the eastern shore of Taiwan, and making the entire Taiwan as the front line. Mm-hmm. That's their purpose. However, the home port of Shandong is in Hainan Island. The number one issue is that it's conditional. You have to get your carrier strike group passing through the Bashi Channel and then to the position that you intended to deploy. And that's a strategic warning that everybody would know from satellite, from other surveillance system. So if we just look at the fixed site to do a war game, that's one scenario. But if we started from D-30 and game all the through, it would be very hard for them to deploy their carrier strike group passing through either Miyago Strait or the Bashi Channel. We got our countermeasures and ways to deal with those.
Raymond, I wanted to go to, in terms of, you had conversations with both military experts and also civil defense forces.
Yes.
What is their take on this, given China's rising aggression?
I think the first lessons for us is not to be coerced into submission. I think that's all the putting on the first priority on the calculations on the Chinese side, because that's we say that Chinese, without firing a shot, you want to take back off Taiwan, and the current situation in Taiwan is political warfare and also about coercive offenses through propaganda and politicians' discussions, especially in the forthcoming 2024 presidential elections. And there's a slogan saying that if you voted against Chinese will, it might bring the whole Taiwan into the battlefield, especially for the young generations. It's not very, very distant from arming the every civilians into a battle ready fighters. It's not like that. It takes training, it takes organization. Of course, our militaries has already the apparatus to, for example, our organization of reserve groups. So it's far from that. It's only to raise the awareness in civil societies and to demonstrate those willingness to resist to the international society.
To show China and the world.
We will talk more about that topic later. Red spoke earlier to Rick Fisher, Senior Fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center based in Washington, D.C. Rick is also a longtime PLA military expert.
Rick, the Taiwan annual Han Kuang exercises are coming up in July. What do you believe the Taiwan military needs to train on to effectively deter a potential Chinese invasion?
It would be great if the Taiwan military could actually blow things up in the Taiwan Strait, blow things up on the east side of Taiwan, and put large targets in the air and blow them up. The People's Liberation Army and the Chinese Communist Party need to understand that when they start a war, they're going to die in massive numbers. Taiwan is going to be destroying the large civil ferries that will be carrying the bulk of PLA invasion forces. They need to understand that of the airliners that they're going to be using to invade Taiwan, Taiwan is going to be shooting them all out of the air. Hundreds of soldiers are going to die instantly in the air. Taiwan needs to make this clear. They need to put it on television so that citizens of the People's Republic of China will see airliners falling out of the sky, ferries blowing up at sea. That is what Taiwan needs to do to make clear to the people of China and to the Chinese Communist Party that an invasion of Taiwan will be a massive and deadly mistake.
In terms of being able to destroy targets in China, do you believe that Taiwan has the necessary defense articles?
They have some, but clearly not enough. Taiwan needs the capacity to be able to interdict ships and aircraft streaming towards Taiwan from Shanghai to Hainan Island. It requires ballistic missiles that can target Navy ships, as well as all of the hundreds of bases that the People's Liberation Army will be using on the Chinese coast to load up ships, to load up ferries, to load up barges to accomplish its invasion of Taiwan. Taiwan has a very high requirement to be able to target Chinese military forces on Chinese territory. For that matter, so does the United States. And while both countries are beginning to build and mass the numbers of missiles needed to reach targets in China, they're not there yet. They don't have enough of these missiles. The Americans nor the Taiwanese have enough of these missiles.
The U.S. has recently announced $500 million in weapons aid for Taiwan. Is that sufficient?
500 million is a good place to start. Bravo to the Biden administration for understanding that Taiwan's requirements are very urgent and that we need to be identifying American military stocks that we can draw down from and transfer immediately to Taiwan. 500 million, of course, is just the beginning, but it is a good start in order for Taiwan to accelerate the delivery of Harpoon missiles, to accelerate the delivery of ATACMS, short-range ballistic missiles, or 500 million will buy about 400,000 AR-15 type rifles if the government of Taiwan takes the crucial step, and I believe this is a crucial step, to begin to arm the Taiwan population in a militia-like organization in order to bring hundreds of thousands, if not a million more rifles to bear on PLA invasion forces.
You spoke about arming Taiwan, and you also spoke about earlier the combination of military and civilian forces the PLA and the Chinese Communist Party is organizing. Rick, do you feel that with its new recent military drills, with the new aircraft carriers going around Taiwan, especially around Taiwan's east coast, has this changed the trajectory?
Exercises now, one in August of 2022, and now the most recent major exercise in the middle of April or early April, indicate that confidence on the part of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party is increasing. They are in greater danger of actually believing that they can initiate a war, that they can, let's say, deploy maybe 10 times the number of aircraft and ships for an intimidation exercise, but then transition that exercise into combat operations. This is the real danger of these large-scale intimidation exercises. And this is why Taiwan needs to be demonstrating to Xi Jinping that it can shoot down airliners, that it can blow up ferries at sea. And the exercises also are aimed at the United States. And the deployment of the carrier Shandong in the most recent exercise is actually a new level of threat. The Shandong and the Liaoning, the Chinese aircraft carriers, really don't compare to American aircraft carrier battle groups. But what is forgotten is that these small Chinese aircraft carriers are not intended to take on American aircraft carrier battle groups. They will be cooperating with hundreds of missile strikes from the land, from other ships, and from aircraft. The real threat to the US Navy and to the Taiwan Navy are the hundreds and hundreds of missile barrages that China can launch against them. The carriers may only actually contribute to the targeting of these missiles, but these missiles are the real threat, and the carriers are designed to assist the missiles. And that is the real danger of the aircraft carrier.
Speaking of what defense articles Taiwan should procure from the U.S. in deterring Chinese invasion, U.S. defense contractors have mentioned F-18 Hornets. They're also used extensively on U.S. aircraft carriers. Professor Ting, would F-18s be a good alternative or effective to replace the Mirage 2000s?
Well, we all know that seems French government reluctantly to upgrade our system for the Mirage 2000. So that is probably the background for the why, or you can say rumor or speculation about the F-18 possibility, so on and so forth. Yeah, if you look at the some kind of basic information, F-18 is somewhat different from Mirage 2000, and to some extent, it's not a bad idea, to procure F-18 to replace Mirage 2000, because if we look at it, because F-18 is used in the aircraft carriers, so
it's most widely used in U.S. carriers.
Yeah,
I
and
understand.
The one feature is that they can take off or land in the short-range airfield. This is probably the very important feature. Another feature is that F-18s combine both defense and attack capability, because F-18 carry a lot of attacking weapon, missile, and air-to-land attacking weapons, so on and so forth. So basically, F-18 is not bad choice, frankly speaking. But we all know that the arms sale is also always has lots of so-called political consideration. For instance, the most important political consideration is that the U.S. government in the past decades somewhat reluctant, don't want to irritate the Beijing's a lot. So the only condition I would say if U.S. decide to sell F-18 to Taiwan is that the F-16 does not work. F-16V probably cannot have maintain the so-called airship capability anymore, and China's military modernization will make our air defense become more costly. So I would say, based on above mentioned two conditions, then without that, then probably U.S. will kind of reluctant to talk with us about over the arms sale of F-18 to us.
So Alex, what other military aircraft also make sense for Taiwan, given our mountainous terrain?
Yeah, a lot of aircraft, fighter jets are making sense for Taiwan's defense because we are desperately need the fifth generation fighters. However, as Professor Ding had just mentioned, the real key issue is logistics. On one hand, if we keep all our major combat aircraft F-16, it's easier on logistics and train people how to maintain those. However, it has a deficiency. The deficiency is that if we have all major combat aircraft of one version, and should there be any technical or accident, normally it will grounded the entire fleet. So if you have a diversified fleet of combat aircraft, then you can maintain the air defense around the clock. There is a debate. And of course, F-18 is much heavier and with much better payload, and it can do ground attack as well. It's a good one. But again, how do we define it? Which version that we can get? What kind of avionics that we can get? And of course, in command control, the data link is the key for F-18 to work.
How does it compare with the F-16V that Taiwan procured recently?
Well, I think F-16V is a brand new aircraft. It's Block 70 and Block 72. It's totally different from what Taiwan used to have. That was only Block 20. So we can say that F-16 Viper or V is somewhat 4.5 generation. It works fine, but we don't know that how many different aircraft, different versions that Taiwan can acquire and can afford to operate. Always remember, logistics and maintenance are the key.
So, Professor Ding, you talk about survivability. So, I just want to know, the U.S. is also encouraging Taiwan to develop our homegrown weapons, and also the U.S. has been leasing these technologies to Taiwan. How successful has that been so far?
On the other hand, we also made tremendous progress in the past 4 or 5 decades. For instance, we are able to produce so-called IDF jet fighter, and now we have a new China jet. On the other hand, I would say our missile, the surface to air, surface to ship missile, I would say have been developed in the very progressively in the past 4 or 5 decades. So, in balance, I would say if we want to develop very sophisticated the so-called platform, it will be somewhat difficult because we don't have engine now to empower the aircraft, so on and so forth. And we don't, our electronics industry was relatively weak, has been relatively weak. So we cannot develop avionics for the fighter jets. But on the other hand, our missile system relatively good, I would say. So we need to see. So we have to do what we can and to further improve our what we can to improve our capability. But if we want to make progress in other aspects, then I guess we will have a debate society-wide to see between so-called butter and the guns. How much we want to spend on the butter, how much spend on the gun. So I would say it takes a tremendous time.
Improving capabilities, indeed, Professor. Raymond, I wanted to go back to South Korea media. They recently reported, quoting CSIS war games, that if China invades Taiwan, Korea Peninsula could severely be impacted by Chinese forces.
Yes.
What do you think they mean by that?
Okay. This concern with the eventuality of Taiwan contingency, what will happen in the Korean Peninsula, and what position the government of South Korea should take, and the opposition party to the ruling party argue that the Korea should hold a neutrality position vis-a-vis China, try to state Korea from the Taiwan contingency. But the ruling party and the media report you mentioned had provided very sufficient counter arguments, saying that it might be essentially inevitable that Korea Peninsula will get involved in case of Taiwan contingency. Why? The reasons are as follows. Firstly, that there are U.S. military bases both in Japan and Korea. And in the case of Taiwan contingency, the U.S. will launch their, for example, fighters or bombers from those bases. And those will make the U.S. bases in Korea a target of attack from the Chinese. Second, that citing the CSIS report, actually China might resort to actively to divergent tactics. Once they attack Taiwan, they will, in parallel, launch an attack in the Korean Peninsula. In order to divert U.S. effort or the military focus from the Taiwan surrounding areas. So in that case, it might be inevitable that the Korea will get involved. So the policy choice, if that's correct, the policy choice for the Korean government might be, you cannot get yourself from the Taiwan contingency, from staying neutral or staying away from the eventuality. You have to do something. For example, to strengthen the U.S.-Korean allies, or to cooperate with other allies in this region, including Japan and Australia, and to strengthen the alliance building in the Indo-Pacific and North Asia region. So this also a very clear case that anything happened in Taiwan Strait will not only be limited to between China and Taiwan. It will at least be a regional affairs, if not a global military crisis, and not to mention the supply chain crisis. So it's inevitable that Taiwanese military contingencies will be a global one, will be an international concern.
And of course, you're also saying that South Korea will inevitably be involved in a crisis.
Yes, yes, yes.
Let's now hear from Batongbacal, University of the Philippines Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea professor. Jay spoke to Rath about why the Philippines is arguably the most important geographic location for Taiwan.
Jay, as a maritime expert, why is the Philippines so important for Taiwan's defense in the case of Chinese people?
Well, I think the Philippines is actually the most important position when it comes to issues about Taiwan's defense. No? It's the closest country. It's directly south of Taiwan. Any humanitarian movement would need to go through the Philippines and would likely go to the Philippines. People fleeing from conflict, people fleeing from the danger zone would likely try to reach the Philippines because it is the closest. They can try to hop between the islands, no, in the Orchid Island group, and then the Batanes, and then the Babuyan Islands to get to Luzon. They can also try to fly directly into the Philippines from whatever whatever airport it is that they are going from. No? Second, the Philippines, as the closest country, would be the ideal staging ground for any kind of activity that supports operations in Taiwan, especially for its defense, because again, it is the closest. And lastly, it's because of the Philippines and Taiwan being two countries at the borders of one of the principal straits used for international navigation. No? There are several straits in there actually, which are very much used by the international community for purposes of trade and mobility. So, and that mobility will include, of course, a military mobility. So, if the Philippines were not here, it would be practically impossible to defend Taiwan from any attempt to take it, especially if it's coming from the nearby mainland of Asia.
Do you feel that is why the U.S. has asked to use and was approved for more bases close to Taiwan in the northern Philippines?
From the U.S. perspective, the Philippines is indispensable to any movement within Southeast Asia. Its closest bases outside of the Philippines would be all the way back in Japan and Guam. So access to Philippine bases is important to make up for that absence of nearby U.S. military bases. And it's not just the issue of Taiwan that is involved there. No? American access through Southeast Asia, which is necessary for them to be able to reach the Indian Ocean, would also be affected. No? Had the Philippines not been around, or if the Philippines would not provide them with access to its facilities and bases here.
In terms of the Filipino perspective, we've seen Bongbong Marcos Jr., the Filipino president, mention Taiwan with ASEAN, and also during his visit to Washington, D.C. in the talks with Biden. What is Marcos Jr.'s stance on Taiwan?
Well, I think from various statements he has made, Marcos's position on Taiwan is clear. Number one, he's very concerned about what is going on in Taiwan. It has geopolitical ramifications, and he has exhibited a bit of keen awareness to that. However, at the same time, he's also concerned about the potential of conflict in Taiwan directly impacting the Philippines and the Philippine population. And he would rather not allow the Philippines to be actively involved in pursuing offensive operations in that. No? But he also realizes that the Philippines is important in deterring. Is an important participant in deterring conflict from taking place. So I think that's why he has agreed to provide the U.S. with access to its positions, its facilities and bases here, especially those that are closer to Taiwan. So even though he'd rather not be actively promoting or supporting offensive operations, still he is aware that he needs to give support to the defense of Taiwan and the deterrence of any armed conflict in Taiwan.
According to Jay, President Marcos Jr. is walking a fine line between maintaining peace in the region and providing the U.S. military with bases that it needs. Professor Ting, how crucial are these bases in the northern Philippines in deterring China from invading Taiwan?
We all know that those bases newly leads to United States, very close to Taiwan. And between Taiwan and the Philippines, a passage chain, as Professor Huang earlier mentioned. so that the if we know that if China's aircraft carrier groups, striking group want to navigate to the east of Taiwan or to the West Pacific, then they have to go through the Bashi Channel. So that's why if both so-called airline members can do something, work together in the Bashi Channel, for instance, undersea detection system, and to deploy some kind of a service to ship attacking system, then or some kind of surveillance system overall, then it will be difficult for the China aircraft striking groups to pass the channel, Bashi Channel. So that's why those bases are extremely important, militarily speaking, because it can deter or probably in real practice to defend against China's passage of the Bashi Channel.
Raymond, talking about the Philippines, which plays a very important role in defending the first island chain, do you think that the rising military tensions in the region will also bring the Philippines closer to Taiwan?
Yes, actually, it's just happening before our own eyes. Actually, in the past decade, the Philippines has tried everything to secure its interests, not only for its own security, but also for its maritime interests. The South China Sea issues dealing with China, but if witness, it's really it has to take a stronger, tougher position against China, because in the previous administration, President Duterte tried to reconcile with China, but they came to no fruition. And also, there are several still happening the incidences, like the intervention by the Chinese Coast Guard, shooting strong laser ray into the Philippines public officials. And those incidents draw Philippines closer to America. So in President Marcos Jr.'s recent visit to Washington, he secured a major extension of U.S. protection umbrella under the the Philippines Pact, Article 4, to any attack on Philippine public vessels and public personnel on the seas, including from the Coast Guard. And that's a very clear incidence that the Philippines in a sense, were forced to get closer to U.S. support. And also in that, and as expressing the extension of lease to the U.S. militaries, they try to play a part in the building up of this key first ally defense with U.S. and with Taiwan. So it's probably out of awareness that any Taiwan contingency will also inevitably involve the Philippines.
Mm-hmm. U.S. ally indeed. Alex, I wanted to go to another U.S. ally, South Korea. We've seen President Yoon Suk-yeol mention Taiwan several times, and he even talked about how a Taiwan contingency would be an international affair, not a domestic one, just like how North Korea is. What do you think his stance is on Taiwan?
Well, I think the geography speaks for itself. If there is a contingency, all the maritime traffic and civil aviation from South China Sea or Southeast Asia to Northeast Asia will be disrupted. So even it's a Taiwan contingency alone, I think the trade, the South Korea's economy will get severe hit. Now, again, I agree with Ray that that Taiwan contingency is not alone, because for the United States, for everything we discussed today is the AOR, or Area of Responsibility of the United States Indo-Pacific Command. But for China, that's a different story. That if there is a Taiwan contingency, I think Seoul and Beijing would first worry about what would be Kim Jong-un's response to a regional crisis.
What would be his response?
Would he wanted to do something to disrupt? So, from a different angle, the Philippines as well. If we see a possible Taiwan, Korean Peninsula, and South China Sea contingency, all developed around the same time. Then, for China, there's 3 theater commands, moving together. The North Command for Korean Peninsula, Eastern Command for Taiwan, and Southern Command for the South China Sea. Does the Central Military Commission of the People's Liberation Army ever had any experience accumulated to deal with 3 contingencies all at once involving 3 theater commands? So I think these are the complicated issues that Beijing needs to think more than twice. And we also need to get ourselves prepared, especially among U.S. allies. There are more information, intelligence sharing, and so we can act together, talk the same, and serve as a deterrent together.
So, Professor Ding, do you foresee that there will be a joint military exercises that may involve Taiwan in the future?
Well, again, no, this is kind of a political issue and a very complicated issue, because as we all know that, in many of the decision making, U.S. if not always, but frequently, think about China. So if United States really want to do something about so-called joint military exercise in the Taiwan Strait area, joint military exercise including South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines in the Taiwan Strait area, then U.S. might think about how China will respond, how China will think over these issues. Then my assumption is that if China become more and more aggressively in the Taiwan Strait, then it would be possibility and become more likely for the U.S. to launch this kind of joint operation.
So to be more passive than responsive, right? Than like active, right?
Yeah. Now at this stage, we can see, it's mostly in the bilateral. U.S. Developed gradually from bilateral to multilateral. At the beginning, it's U.S. Philippines, U.S. South Korea, U.S. Japan, and U.S. Taiwan. And then now we see gradually so-called minilateralism, U.S. Japan, Korea. And now we see U.S., Philippines, Australia. So we can see it's a kind of incremental step. But I would say this kind of incremental step is kind of a condition on how China act and react.
So if they're more
China
aggressive,
become more aggressive, then I would say U.S. might step up its face and attitude, then become more kind of a joint operation.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel.
Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.